Okay, so the topic I chose for today was indentured servants and slaves of the years 1835 to 1840. I chose two very important people, one being Harriet Jacobs and the other one being Frederick Douglass. And also I wanted to use Thomas Jefferson as the slave owner, I guess I should say. And two abolitionists are Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I felt that Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs were good to go together because they were around the same time period and they kind of countered each other's situations. Frederick Douglass grew up not even knowing his own age, and this is a little quote from him. I cannot tell how old I am. The destitution was among my earliest troubles. I learned when I grew up that my master, and this is the case with masters generally, allowed no questions to be put to him. Such questions are deemed evidence of impatience. Okay, so that's just an example of, what he went through, and I guess even the littlest thing, actually knowing your age is a big thing. That was a luxury to the slaves, whereas it was to know their mother, their age, where they came from. And most didn't know that. They were taken away from their mothers at very young ages and had a wet nurse. Most slave owners had a wet nurse that would nurse them, and as soon as they were old enough to get up and do some work, they were put to work. Another one was Harriet Jacobs. Or Frederick Douglass, just let me say this, he based his narrative or autobiography around his physical abuse from his slave owners, whereas Harriet Jacobs based her autobiography over her psychological abuse. Harriet Jacobs was a slave from the years of 1817 to 1897. And she was sexually abused by her slave owner. And what was weird is back then, slave owners were not supposed to have any affairs with, black women, of course, because they were considered inferior to them. So I felt that that was a little contradicting in itself, just the fact that he would have slept with her, just because, that's like saying, well, she is of his standards. And she actually went through a lot of psychological abuse as well, because she felt as if she had loved him in a sense, and it wasn't that. It was just really, he was the sake of her freedom. So, and this is a quote after she was released from her bondage, which she ran away, as well as Frederick Douglass did. She said, "It has been painful to me in many ways to recall the dreary years I passed in bondage. I would gladly forget them if I could. Yet the retrospection is not altogether without solace, for with those gloomy recollections come tender memories." And those tender memories were more faced towards her grandmother. Frederick Douglass was independent and didn't have anybody to lean on during these times when he was abused. And he was abused for very, very small things, and lashed on his back multiple times and whipped. Just terrible, terrible stuff. Harriet Jacobs was sexually abused, and that was basically her punishment. Also, Thomas Jefferson was I'm sorry if I'm skipping over stuff. Thomas Jefferson was a pro-slave owner, and honestly, he was kind of upset about the fact, he was very contradictory as well. He was upset at the fact that they wanted to cut out slavery of the Declaration of Independence, but he had slaves, and he tried to play it off as if he was, pro-abolition. But he had slaves, and he had affairs with slaves. And I think it's kind of funny because back then, the way he distinguished or supported the fact that slaves were slaves was, their bodily fluids were different, they sweat more throughout their body, so that made them better for labor, and they only thought of forethought, which if you only think in forethought, then that means you don't have an imagination, you can't write, you're not intelligent. But I think Harriet Jacobs and Frederick countered this because with their autobiographies, Frederick Douglass did this with no help. He learned from his mistress before she, began to abuse him, his ABCs, and he also learned from the streets with the little kids. And Harriet Jacobs actually had a pen pal, I can't recall her name right now, but who helped her write her story down. But just to be able to get the story out there and publish and all that good stuff, I mean, it takes more than forethought. Also, I wanted to say this, phrenology and physiognomy were two ways that they distinguished slaves, or, slaves inferior to white men. And what that is physiognomy is the shape or the size of your skull. And if you had a big forehead, you were considered smart. Well, back then, because of malnutrition and so many other things, a slave's head was smaller than a white man's head, so they would consider them inferior. But to wrap this up, I just wanted to say that now that you have a little bit of background of slavery and the mistreatment that they underwent, I just hope that everybody would jump on my bandwagon and, just be against that, because we all, we're Americans, and it was part of the American dream to just have freedom, and we all deserve it. But thank you so much.